You have to have hope and empowerment that your actions are going to make a difference. If you tell a story that we're bad, it's all gloom and doom. It's game over. People feel deep shame. No one does anything positive from a place of shame. If you tell a story about someone and that person takes us on an emotional journey through them, we become a participant in the story. The stories we tell ourselves, I think, can be so detrimental or so beneficial. That inner critic, the limiting beliefs, are the stories we tell ourselves that hold us back, or the stories of, I can do it. I have a goal and I imagine the life I want or the world I want to build.
What's going on neuroscience-wise? What's actually going on in our brains?
Oxytocin, the love hormone, it's what builds.
Welcome to The Edge of Possible, the podcast dedicated to helping you achieve extraordinary things. I'm your host, Cameron Atlas, and together, let's unlock your edge. I'm a big believer in the power of storytelling. Stories are how we learn and how we interact with one another. They can move conversations forward. They can inspire us. They can be vehicles for influence. But if we don't understand the art and science of what makes a great story, then we're missing out on a lot of the potential here. That's why I brought in a master of human-centered storytelling, Cheryl Miller Houser. Cheryl is an award-winning documentary filmmaker who has spent her career shaping culture and shifting attitudes. Whether it's directing films featured on Netflix like Generation Startup, or working with brands and organizations to create connection, community, and positive action, Cheryl knows exactly how to bridge the gap between a brand's message and a human's heart. Today, we're talking about how to tell better stories, and we're going deep into the architecture of struggle and triumph. You're going to learn why vulnerability is a leader's greatest superpower, the neurochemicals that make a story stick in the brain, and the exact think, feel, do framework Cheryl uses to move people to action. If you want to know what it really takes to become unforgettable, this is for you. That's coming right up here on The Edge of Possible. Cheryl, you talk a lot about the science of storytelling. For the person listening who really wants to understand how to tell better stories, whether it be for their companies, within their own roles, or in a general conversation, what's the biggest mistake that so often gets made when it comes to telling a compelling story?
There are so many mistakes that often get made, but the most compelling, engaging stories are ones that are human. And the science tells us that if you tell a story about someone and that person takes us on an emotional journey through them, then we go on a journey that's called narrative transportation, where we become a participant in the story. So it's really important to find people, whether you're telling stories about a real person, then cast someone, find somebody who shares the full range of human emotion, or if it's scripted, then a script along those lines. And it's also structure is really important. And so what is the story? Who are you featuring? Why do we care about them? Are they relatable? Are we going to go on that emotional journey with them? And then in terms of story structure, the most effective structure is one of struggle and triumph. People articulate this through the hero's journey or in other ways, but the science has shown that we root for and we go on that journey of narrative transportation if somebody has a goal and they're high stakes. The higher the stakes, the more we care, and there are obstacles that get in the way that they have to overcome, and they transform in the process. And the greater their transformation, the more moved we are. And if they reach their goal, triumph at the end, then we, because we've gone on this journey through them and, with them, we feel empowered that we can take things on and reach a goal. So it's, first of all, figuring out what is the story you want to tell. People often, there is no clarity. Stories have to start with a framework, a framing, and a big idea, a theme, and everything has to ladder up to that, whether it's a keynote, a feature film, a documentary, a 30-second commercial. There has to be a big idea that everything ladders up to, and then people we care about, and then a story structure that grabs our attention and holds that attention. And so that wasn't one thing. I'm sorry. I'm not a minimalist when answering questions, but anyway, yes. And anyway, it's not one thing. It's all of them. And then if you're telling brand storytelling, it's really important to tell it from the framework of your customers, your clients, your audience, to really not, and this is true of all storytelling, to not show up me, but to really understand who your audience is, and then tell stories in a way that really conveys you are listening to them and you understand them.
Well, I really want to dive into the narrative transformation in a moment. Before we do that, when it comes to, I heard relatability and having people care is a two big parts of it, right? Because if you can't take people along the journey, then it doesn't matter how good the end is. If people aren't going along with you to begin with and they're not invested in it, then you're not making any kind of transformation whatsoever. You're not selling any products. You're not influencing in any way, shape, or form. So how do we get somebody to feel relatable when it comes to the story that we're telling, like the character, and how do we get someone to care?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And great question. And it is by featuring people or telling stories, or if you're the storyteller, I mean, we are often telling stories. If you're the CEO of a company or any, I mean, you meet somebody at a party and you're telling a story, the more vulnerable we are, the more open we are. And I'm not saying you have to like weep and tell some appropriate for that situation. Doesn't have to be oversharing, but as if you are open, if a leader shows up and is human and is honest about, like, I'm having a really hard time. My mother is dying, or, my child is like struggle, like whatever. This went viral recently. The CEO of Nike had a staff meeting and he said, I'm really tired. And it got picked up everywhere as how human he was. Like they're having a rough time and he was just very human. And there's something called the pratfall effect, where when leaders show up and they're just so confident and perfect, then people are afraid to admit that there's something negative going on. Like the more open people, the more human a leader is, and open appropriately, the more teams feel that they can show up in their fullness. And then people are open, and then they are addressing problems before they become a big deal. So in terms of brand storytelling, oftentimes marketing gives us a view of motherhood or of life that is ideal or glamorized, and then we feel shame, we feel bad, we feel, because that's not reality, that's not truly human, that's not real. They tell stories around experiences. In my recent South by Southwest keynote, I used a spot from a Brazilian company, Boticário. It's not how they're pronounced in Brazilian, but which just, I mean, it still to this day takes my breath away, and I've seen it so many times, but it's called Tempesta, and it's the story brief, it's an ad, but about a mother and a son, and he comes home at like 4 a.m. in the morning, and she's so worried about him, and they have this huge fight, and he feels that she's over, bearing and controlling, and she feels so hurt, and in the end it ends with them reconciling in the love, but it's so real, it's so human, and it was super successful, because they were saying to moms across Brazil, we see you, we understand what you're going through, and this is normal. You are normal. You don't need to feel shame and embarrassment about this. Is like normal. So when I'm making brand spots or documentaries, I look to cast people who share that full range of human emotion, and then I delve deep with them. I'm very comfortable in discomfort, but full range. So the pain and all the emotions around pain and discomfort, and also joy and love. Being human is that full range of experience. And if I made a film for the Commissioner of Children and Families in New Jersey, who's trying to overhaul the foster care system there, and about the systemic racism in that system. And I filmed with 3 people who are Black, who grew up in foster care, and who really shouldn't be alive today given what they've experienced. Everyone who sees that film, everyone identifies with Tamia, Deshawn, and Cayenne, because they identify with universal human emotions and experiences. Deshawn's desire for safety and security, Tamia's desire for identity, which was taken from her, Cayenne's desire to be heard and respected and treated with dignity. So those are, if you can capture in a story emotions that every human being feels, every single human being, we all have the same emotions and the same needs. If you can capture some of those universals, and I mean, it can be joy, it can be laughter, it can be positive ones, but something universal, then the viewer, and it's not only in film, it can be in a keynote, it can be in a written story, the audience then steps into the shoes of that person. And it's not about the demographics or the specific experience. It's about, oh, I recognize that emotion and I see myself in that person. And that is the most powerful stories. I mean, I love telling stories that break down bias between people and that help us see that it sounds so trite and corny, but we truly are united in our humanity, in being human beings.
Are there certain emotions that tend to, you mentioned about the struggle to the triumph being one of the most powerful ways to go when it comes to telling a story. Are there certain emotions when it comes to the struggle first and foremost that tend to maybe pull at the heartstrings or have somebody want to go on that narrative transportation?
That's a great question. And I saw a study recently that was done out of the University of Pennsylvania. 2 professors there looked at I forget the number, but it was a vast number of articles from the New York Times. They looked at the ones that were most shared and what did those have in common. And what they found was that those were stories that ignited emotions that we feel in our body. So on the positive spectrum, like awe. I mean, that's something that is a somatic experience. On the negative, anger or like heartbreak. So I think that's interesting that the more visceral the emotion, I think. I did find that study really interesting. In terms of my own work and the feedback I hear, it's, I made a film, Generation Startup, where I followed 6 young people for a year and a half, launching startups in Detroit. I really wasn't, I wished them well, but I didn't care if their startups were successful or not. I was interested in the fact that these were people 22, 23, 24 years old who had the courage or the naivete, or maybe a little both, to do steps so far outside their comfort zone. And it's really a celebration of learning by doing. But Dextina is one of the people we followed, who is a Black engineer, and she grew up in poverty. She went to MIT. 2% of engineers in the United States are Black women. And her journey is one of always feeling, silenced and finding her voice and being the different one. And every single person who has seen that film, and I've traveled around the U.S., traveled around the world with it. It came out on Netflix. I heard feedback from literally hundreds of people from all demographics. Everyone identifies with Dextina because everyone understands that feeling of being left out at some point, not invited to a birthday party, not picked for a sports team, not picked for, to be on a project at work. I mean, whatever it is, we all understand so clearly that feeling of being left out and disregarded. So it's really any experience that is something we can relate to.
Well, it sounds like as well that depending on what story you're aiming to tell and what is the outcome as to like why you're telling that story, whether it's on a business side or a personal side or influencing in some way, shape or form, there is like selecting these pieces that can almost expand out in a way because, okay, 2% of people, 2% of Black women are engineers. In terms of like who are engineers, there's only 2% of the population within the engineering space. And so there's not going to be many Black female engineers that are going to even watch the video. Like there might be some, but it's going to be a pretty small piece. So you've got to make it relatable in a more generalized sense. And
Absolutely.
So picking those pieces where, like if you were to think about as you were sharing, I'm thinking, to think about it in a way of, well, what is it that I'm wanting them to feel first and foremost? Well, I want them to feel the experience of, what it feels to feel left out, for whatever reason. Well, okay, what stories do we have that could be a fit for that? Whether it's my own stories that I'm telling or somebody else's, and then how can it be told in a way that, that people actually like lean into?
You hit it exactly right in where you started, which was, oftentimes a company will approach me and say, we want to make a video or we want to make a film. Or I coach leaders on narrative storytelling, pulling out kind of their the milestones in their lives, their values, their beliefs that they can then start, building really compelling stories around. But I always start with that question: who is your audience? Then what do you want them to think, to feel, and do? And the feel and the do are far more important than think, because we are emotional beings. We do not take action based on intellect. We take action based on emotion. What we do is we rationalize our actions after the fact through intellect. But every study, purchasing decisions, like decisions across the board, are primarily ignited through emotion.
Why is that?
Because we are emotional beings. As much as we like to think we are rational beings, we are emotional beings. That's a great question. I mean, I do know a lot, and I'm fascinated by the neuroscience of storytelling. I have to dig deep into that because I'm very fascinated by that as well. But yes, and those emotions, it's also our conditioning. I think that a lot of people are not in touch with what they really feel, and most people are terrified of what they feel. And I think that back to your initial question of what are the mistakes in terms of storytelling, I think that most people and most brands don't want to tell stories that are human and real, because being human is really hard and it is really messy. I mean, it's beautiful and wondrous, and there's love and there's joy and there's so much wonderful about being a human. And there is also struggle and pain, and it's not all beautiful and wonderful. And you really need to acknowledge that full range of the human experience. And most people are too uncomfortable and too afraid with the stuff that's uncomfortable and messy. I don't know if I answered your initial question in this.
Yeah, we're good. I guess with that, it makes me think about, well, if people are feeling a certain emotion, they don't want to feel that emotion. and then someone is able to, in a company sense, or if it's, just in general conversation, share a story in a way that, one, enables them to recognize that they're not bad or out of place or anything like that, is that it's normal to feel and experience this emotion, and that this can take you where you want to go. And I know that for, when it comes to delivering keynotes, is that when a story is there, the goal is, that the person in the audience, each person in the audience sees themselves in the story, which is the narrative transformation, as you mentioned. There is to feel a certain experience from a neurochemical standpoint, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. And it is ultimately that here's where you might be right now. And here's a story that could then, ideally, by the end, they feel that they can move through whatever challenge it is that they're specifically going through. And I think one of the best things that can come out of a keynote, for me personally at least, is someone coming up after says, it was like you were speaking to me.
Yes.
It's like, because then if it's in a room of, say, 1,000 people, and yet one person has said, like, it felt like you were talking specifically to me. I think that's the beauty of storytelling, is that we're able to tell it in a way where we're co-creating with every single audience member, which is beautiful in that way. And it's what makes storytelling so powerful. And so, being able to move them in that direction. I guess,
absolutely.
what are the steps?
Yeah. And, after a keynote, to have someone come up and say, like, I was about to say yes to a job that is not aligned, and I'm going to call them and say, I'm not taking the job, or like weeping and saying, I came to say thank you, but I can't talk right now. Is
the ultimate of storytelling to enable action to be taken? Like, if we go back thousands of years ago, right, to me, it's, okay, the story gets told about how not to be eaten by something, or how not to be killed, how to stay alive, basically. And to me, then that would be, okay, there's a specific action, ideally, that results as a result of being told the story. I'm going to be safer. I'm going to not end up dead. And as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking, well, one of the powerful pieces of story is it that it results in an action being taken, even if that's like a non-action? What's the reason for storytelling?
I think storytelling serves so many purposes. One is a huge one is it's the connective tissue. It's how we bond with each other, care about each other. It's how we work through whatever we're feeling and going through and understanding. It's what you said before, not feeling alone, realizing I'm normal. I don't need to feel shame about this thing. Like, everyone goes through this. So, it's how you get to fall in love, get to know someone. It's all those things. And it is also, how we form culture and ritual, and the impetus for me to tell stories and to tell the stories that I love to tell, that really do capture that human experience. Whether it's the films I make, the commercials I do, the keynotes I give, it's always about, for me, trying to take people on a journey of transformation that shifts attitudes and shifts behavior in a positive way. It's sometimes social impact, like overhauling the foster care system in New Jersey, and, getting the 6,600 employees to realize their job is to support families, not take children from their parents. It's also just awakening people to, we are all mirrors for each other. And I like to be a mirror that in my films and my keynotes, to show up and empower people, to reflect back to people the power we have within, to take agency over our lives, to engage our imagination and imagine the world we want, the life we want, and then to put our attention and intention there and make it happen, to cast off other people's expectations of us that we have to, meet other people's expectations, because a lot of people live by that. We all do. We call it the inner critic or whatever, where, the limiting beliefs. So yes, my goal is always positive transformation and action for always.
Yeah,
always.
I mean, that action piece, as you're sharing, it's inspiring. It's inspiring some form of action. Now, here's the thing. That action could be that I'm not going to work or do anything right now. I'm just going to sit and be immersed by a great movie, right?
Yeah,
and I'm just going to be
fine.
in it, and it enables me to feel what it is I'm going to feel. There's a specific action that's there. Each of the other pieces, whether it's a specific action that results in a belief being shifted, a bias being dismantled, and then the standard actions as well of I'm actually going to do something or not do something as a result of that. If we think about it in that way, that whatever your goal is that, story has the ability to be able to move someone into action. And that's a beautiful thing to be able to do.
I mean, that is. It is. I don't know. I guess there are other ways to move people into action. Like, something like a car crash happens, like, or something like there's an action that mobilizes you, or someone gets sick and you have to take action. But yes, and that is why when clients come to me, that is always my question: who is your audience? And ultimately, what do you want? What action do you want them to take? And then that is what guides the stories we tell. And it's why when you asked what are the mistakes that storytellers make, I started with the importance of story structure. And so always thinking about how do you structure a story so that you're going to inspire people at the end to take positive action. This is one of the things I really have a hard time with all of the storytelling around sustainability. I think it has done so much harm. If you tell a story about that we're bad and we're destroying the planet, and we are, that is true, and it's all gloom and doom. There's we're all, it's game over. Then first of all, people feel deep shame. And no one does anything positive from a place of shame. And secondly, if we feel that there's nothing more to be done, like game over, you have to have hope to take an action. You have to believe and you have to feel empowered that hope that your actions and empowerment that your actions are going to make a difference. And so that is really important in terms of storytelling. And again, if the story ends with, well, there's nothing we can do about it, then of course, why would you take action?
Yeah, you're not going to feel empowered at all. Yeah.
Right. So that idea of going on that journey with someone who struggles, who transforms, and then reaches a goal. Generation Startup. One of the people we followed, by the end of the movie, he was fired from his startup and he faced losing his parents. But you feel he has triumphed because his whole narrative arc is living life on his own terms and not doing what his parents expect of him and really have boxed him in a corner to do. He's like, no, I am not, I love you, parents. I love you very much. And I honor the way you want to live, but that's not how I want to live. He also resonated with every single viewer of any demographic around the world, because also very relatable. And that's why I put the tagline of the movie, Learning to Fail, Redefining Success. Because success is not, for me, success is not just the conventional, you got a promotion or you're earning more money or it's, if you're doing all of that and you're miserable and you're disconnected from yourself, that's not triumph at all. So in the case of Labib, we, felt so inspired by him because in that course of the year and a half we followed him, he really came to understand who he was and what he valued, and that, he had the courage to live life on his own terms, being loving and respectful of his parents, but saying, no, I can't follow your wishes. They're too constricting. And that's not the life I want. That's the life you want for me, but not the life that will make me happy. So anyway, that's,
So should we ask, what action do I want this person or thing to take? Or before we ask the question of what do we want them to think, feel, and do? Like, is that like the feeling part? Because obviously the do part is, okay, there's an action there. Is the doing, like the action we want them to take, is that the first piece? And then the feeling comes, okay, how do we facilitate that through the feeling, or is it the other way around?
It always starts with the action.
The action, yeah.
It always starts with the action. I mean, Union Bank of Switzerland, UBS, came to me when they were launching Project Entrepreneur, which the goal was to support female founders. And again, they wanted a launch video. They knew they wanted a launch video, but they had no idea what. So again, in our meeting, I said, who's your audience? Again, what do you want them to think, to do, to feel, to do? And the do was, we want male VCs because most funding comes from men. Most VCs are men. We want to break down the bias that men have about female founders, and we want to inspire women to launch companies. So I said, okay, well, the two main biases that men have about female founders and why they don't want to fund them is, one, they will have children and care less about the company, and two, they are risk averse. And women are afraid to start a company because it's like, I want a family and I want these other things, and how can I do it all? So I said, okay, we're going to find a female founder who has a lot of kids, young kids, and who has raised
more kids the better.
Yeah, and has raised a lot of money and taken some big risks. And I found a founder who had 4 kids in 5 years.
There we go.
While she was founding the company, and had, raised $17 million and was scaling quickly. So she checked both boxes. And I filmed with her over 2 days. I was there at 5 a.m. when she was waking up with working out in her garage and getting lunch, packing lunch for her kids and breastfeeding the baby before she went off to work that day. So it's always, with Generation Startup, when we made that film, entrepreneurship among 18 to 34-year-olds was at a 28-year low. The goal of that film was to encourage young people to launch startups, and ideally in economically depressed cities, but also to give a very realistic view of it's not glamorous, it's hard. We also did want to show the need and importance for greater diversity in that world. It's one of the reasons why Dextina's story is, a heartbeat and a theme of the film. But it always starts with the action, and then you reverse engineer and say, okay, if that's the action, because that also, the action speaks to who is the audience. So with the Project Entrepreneur, UBS, I filmed with somebody who, again, back to the emotions, who exhibited every trait and characteristic that a male VC has and values. So resilient, determined, tough, all those things, but also very heart-centered, brilliant, risk taker, had a vision, all the things. So they saw themselves in her, even though I have her breastfeeding in this launch video I made.
The biases is something really interesting there, of really getting clear. It sounds like near the start, and maybe we can go through the structure. This part as well, I want to just touch on as we go through the structure, is how important it is to understand, okay, what are the biases that we're dealing with here? Because these are, in a sales conversation, it's the objections we've got to overcome. In creating any kind of behavior change, there are biases that somebody has that has them behaving in a certain way. Otherwise, they wouldn't behave in a certain way. And to get them to change that means to change their biases, or to at least, break down those and replace them with something else. So how do you go about thinking about biases, having that conversation early in there when it comes to the story? That sounded like that's a big part of the conversation, not only to understand how we want them to think, feel, and do, but also, well, how do they think, feel, and do right now? How are they behaving right now? And what are those biases that are actually resulting in them behaving in that specific way?
Yeah, I mean, it's, with the project entrepreneur example, the most important thing was to understand if their goal was to break down biases that male VCs have about female founders, then to say, what are those biases? And then to say, okay, how do we take those men on a journey of narrative transportation through a female whom they identify with? So it doesn't matter that what her gender is, that she's a mom of 4 young kids, that she's breastfeeding, like that doesn't matter. They will identify with her emotions, her experiences of leading a team. I filmed her meeting with one of her funders, one of her VCs, to have a conversation with the two of them where he's coaching her. They're talking about prepping for the new fundraise. So, I created experiences and also allowed them to see her as a human, but also really competent and able to juggle. In the case of Generation Startup, if one of our goals was to show, and again, the best storytelling is show, don't tell. When you begin to lecture to somebody, they're going to shut down immediately. Again, back to neuroscience. We take in information much better in service to a narrative. If the goal is, again, to break down a bias. So with Generation Startup, one of the goals was to bring people into the experience of the biases, prejudices, in that world and the need for greater diversity. But why is there not greater diversity? Why are people not, who are not bro-y white guys joining that world? And why, if they join that world, do they not stay in that world or feel welcome in that world? Then that journey through Dextina is the way. So every single person relates to Dextina through that universal human emotion of feeling left out or feeling not seen, not valued, silenced. And so when people see the film and they realize, oh, wow, this is what we are doing to people who don't look like us, who are not like the majority in the startup world, I think that people who see that film are not going to treat someone of color in the same way as before they saw the film. I mean, not that everyone shows up with bias and silences someone who is Black. So I'm not saying that everyone behaves that way, but that was what Dextina was experiencing. And again, if you watch the movie and you go through that emotional journey with her and you identify with her so strongly, then it's like, wow, that doesn't feel good when someone does that to me. And I don't want to do that to someone else. And also, Dextina had so much to contribute. Like, that's the other thing. We showed how awesome she is and how smart she is. And so It's like you also see what you're missing out on when you silence somebody.
Yeah. Well, and whether it's biases or it's overcoming objections, there's something that's getting in the way of somebody then moving to the action that you're wanting them to take. And I think it's really smart to be having that conversation. And again, whether it's a conversation about biases or objections, there's it's almost like what is getting in the way. Is there a specific bias? Is it an objection that has to be overcome? Because by having the understanding of that, we can go about determining, okay, what specifically has to be built in to ensure that we move through. And this goes for, whether it is, like you said, breaking down biases, overcoming objections in a sales conversation or in, getting a customer to come on board. Or if you're dating, for example, like if there's certain objections that the person's going to have, you've got to be able to overcome that bias that somebody has that, oh, I want this kind of person in my relationship. And if you're not that person, but that it seems like there's other things that are aligned, your responsibility to overcome that. And so let's talk then about the structure. So what are the steps to creating a compelling story?
For me, again, I do sometimes find stories that make my heart leap and then develop them and try to get them funded. I do that less now because getting documentaries financed right now is so hard. So most of my work happens because a company reaches out or a nonprofit reaches out or a a C-suite executive, wants to do thought leadership and wants coaching on how to show up. I just filmed videos with the CEO of one of the world's largest law firms, which was really fun. Like, I love working with leaders and helping them show up as more human and relatable. But if it's a company or brand, a nonprofit that approaches and says, we want to tell our story, then the first step is really understanding why and who the audience is and what they want the audience to, think, feel, and do. Even if the do is we want them to buy more of our product, it's still, then it becomes a discussion about how to tell stories that form an emotional connect. It's always about telling stories that form an emotional connection. And that never happens by being transactional or by putting a spotlight on the product or the client. And then
So that's step one, correct? That's step one there. What's step two?
That is step one. Step two is, once I really understand the goals of the story, it's then figuring out who needs to be the main character or characters. So when the Commissioner of Children and Families in New Jersey approached me to say, I want to tell a story about how we are overhauling the system and flipping it so that I want our employees to understand their job is to support families, not break them up, and the general public to understand that's our role as well. And we want families in New Jersey to come to us for support rather than be terrified that we're going to destroy their families. And she had been doing a co-design where she had invited people from Black communities who had grown up in foster care or had experienced foster care to co-design a system with her department. And so I said, well, Christine, the stories are your co-designers. I mean, they embody the need for the changes you want, and they are driving the change in this transformation you're doing. It's not your story. Because she is who she is, she said, yes, you're right. It is their stories. And so then it's like you have to figure out, like, what is the story you're telling? And that...
Do you do that before? So do you do who the character is before what story is being told, or do you go what story is going to be told to get that outcome from step one, and then they go hand in hand?
Oh, they have to go hand in hand.
Yeah,
so once Christine said, I want to tell the story of how we're overhauling the system, well, she was overhauling the system by inviting people who had grown up in the system to co-design with her agency and make change from within. That is the story. The story was this co-design initiative. That was the story. But again, the story didn't emanate. Yes, it was her idea. The co-design was her idea. And she brought in IDEO, major, design thinking company. But it was the co-designers who were driving the changes that need to happen and who were at the heartbeat, at the center of the co-design. And so, again, if we had told the story from the point of view of Christine and from that point of view, then it would have been top down and kind of her coming in as the savior. Whereas
and not relatable in that way,
no.
right? Not relatable, yeah.
Whereas it was really her saying, the people who have lived in foster care, grown up in foster care, they know better than I do what needs to change. Let's hear from them. And they definitely embodied the need for her changes. So she said, we've not told our story because I don't know how. It's too complex. I don't know how to tell this story in its entirety. So then it was like, again, what's the goal? Who's the audience? And what is the story? Like, who's the audience? What's the goal? Then helps shape what is the story. But what is the story goes hand in hand with who are we featuring in this story? Again, this is another huge mistake that people make with storytelling. Nonprofits oftentimes you've got the nonprofit leader talking about what they're doing and the impact they're having. And it's a lot of tell and very little show. And if there is show, oftentimes it's icky. It's like we're saving people. Like, look what. Whereas again, if you but brand storytelling also, make your customers, your clients, the people who you are serving in a nonprofit or for-profit, the people you are serving, turn them into heroes. That is, always the win, because then whoever is watching, they see themselves and they're brought along in that story of narrative transportation. The commissioner in New Jersey was like, yes, I want to tell the stories of our co-designers. Then we had to choose who to feature. I tell stories with real people. I'm a documentary filmmaker. So whether it's a brand documentary or a commercial or a launch video, a web series, it's always with real people. So then I look to cast people who are vulnerable, who are open, who are willing to share the full range of their human emotion. So in that case, I joined a Zoom because a lot of the co-designs were on Zoom, and I identified 3 people. I mean, all the co-designers were amazing, but I identified 3 people who I really felt very drawn to. And then I had very honest conversations with each one of them where I said, this is the journey we are going to go on together. I want to capture the full range of your experiences and your emotions. Are you going to be comfortable with that? And will that re-trigger all the trauma you've had? Because I don't want to cast you in this film if you're not at a place where you are willing and able to share, or where it could be harmful to you to be, for me to be asking questions that are so probing. And each one of them said, yes, I have been through hell, but I am now at a place where I have my own children, I have love, I have stability, I've broken intergenerational harm, and I want to tell my story so that others don't suffer in the way that I have. And I want my stories to be used for positive change. And then when I'm filming with people, I still am very sensitive. I can feel if they're really uncomfortable. And I always say to people, if there's anything I ask and you don't want to go there, tell me, but people actually, it's deeply empowering for people to be, because, and the 3 people I filmed with for that film, I mean, it has been an incredibly transformational experience for them, very empowering. And then that film is being used in such beautiful ways in New Jersey and across the country for positive change of the foster care system. One of our greatest human needs is to feel seen, heard, and validated. And so going through that process of sharing, and it's also when we share our deepest shame or experiences that have been really difficult, when we share them and feel understood and heard, it's a relief. It's like a weight lifted, which speaks to something you said earlier when we were talking. The stories, when you tell stories that are, the film, the New Jersey foster care film, in screenings around New Jersey with community screenings, people get up and they say, I thought I was the only one who had this feeling or this experience. Generation Startup, when I did screenings at co-working spaces or at startups, the founders would weep during this film and get up and say, I didn't realize that other people were having such a hard time. I have to be so brave. I have to show my family, my investors, my teams that everything's great. And I've got it all covered. But it's so lonely and it's so hard and it's so helpful to know I'm not alone in this. So, that is, again, the power of telling stories that really capture that full range of what we all feel. And even the foster care film, again, people watch that film who have never grown up in foster care, who are not Black, and who identify so strongly with the three people featured in that film, because we all have that need for a sense of self and identity. We all want safety and security, and we all value family and love. So it was really a film about people who had been deprived of love and family by a system, and who have found love and family through having their own families.
Mm. What are the neurochemicals then? Like from a neuroscience standpoint, what's actually going on in our brains when it comes to this? Like, because to have someone care, to be relatable, these pieces that we're talking about here, and then to influence somebody toward action. What's going on neuroscience wise?
So that, I know you know this too, but oxytocin, which is the chemical that it's called the love hormone. It's what builds trust. It's that warm and fuzzy feeling we have. So when people are sharing stories that are deeply relatable on an emotional level, then we are secreting oxytocin, which again, love, trust, bonding, and that is at the heart of empathy. The word empathy it's so now overused, but it is, and I think it's bedfellow compassion. They're different, but equally important and wonderful. Yes, but the ability to experience, to identify with, to relate to what someone else is feeling, even if they're completely different than we are, is so critically important. And oxytocin is really a driver of that.
So we have oxytocin. What else is going on? Do you have some other insights you can share around this?
Well, cortisol is another biggie, and cortisol is, that story structure of what makes us sit up and take note, and also helps activate where emotion and memory are very close to each other in our brain. So again, when we're activating emotions, we're also activating memory. But yes, and there are other hormones that I'm not a super expert on all the hormonal changes, so I don't want to misspeak. But oxytocin and cortisol are for sure two biggies.
One of I've heard that from a dopamine standpoint as well, especially when that it's the chemical for that reward and motivation, and that when something like that final piece where it falls into place, and it's like almost like the aha moment that there's something that kicks in at that point as well, which then has people go on that and journey. I'm sure there's other pieces in there, from a neuroscience standpoint.
I do think that it's those three.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Okay, so we have those different steps so far. Any other steps? Do you have is it a specific framework that you follow? And so we've got these steps so far. Is there anything else that has to happen in order to tell a compelling story?
I say that we're all mirrors, and I feel as a storyteller, I am merely a conduit. So
what do you mean by that?
The more emotionally invested I am in a story and in the people whose stories I'm telling, I think the better the story is. So what I mean by being a conduit is I show up in my vulnerability and very open-minded, very open-hearted, and go on a journey with people I'm filming with, or if I'm doing the narrative coaching with a CEO or someone I'm working with. And through asking these probing questions and listening with all my heart, we go on a journey together where I am then able to reflect, pull out, capture, and convey the deepest inner truths and deepest emotions from the person. And then that, whether if it's on film, I've captured it on film, that is captured in that moment and reflected back out in my films or, brand spots. Or if it's narrative coaching with someone, we're capturing that. And I record, audio record all of that. Or if I'm doing video thought leadership, it's captured on video. But able to then capture that and use that, if I record audio with somebody and then we're using what they actually said to create a keynote or a thought leadership written pieces or video or in my films, I am the conduit to capture their emotions and their inner being and then reflect that back out. So it's me showing up in my openness and vulnerability and deepest humanity, and that unleashes something in others.
Yeah.
It's building trust. It's making them feel seen, validated, heard, understood. It's that trust and understanding that really unlocks for others. But
I think it's really important to document the stories that we have as individuals, whether it's stuff just purely from a personal standpoint, you have nothing to gain from a professional point of view. One of the things that I thought about probably about 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, made the commitment to dedicating an hour a day for a certain period of time, an hour a day to writing and documenting the stories of my entire life. And there's a structure that I have for that I built out over the course of years. The key thing was just having my notes section on my phone, and just as I remembered a story, just write it, just put a little name of it. This is what the story is. But the reason why is I had this realization that all of the pain, the challenge, the setbacks, the overcoming of those, the courage, the fear, all of the things, that if I died today, that all of that wisdom that I've gained over the course of, now 41 years at the time of this recording has gone. And I know that there's a big part of people documenting, writing a book or videos or courses and things like that. And these stories that have made who we are. I think I call it a storybook. I have a storybook. It's filed away, and they're all filed in different pieces. Then the different neurochemicals that are released in people's brains when I tell them, and these different pieces. But at the core component of that is get it out of your head and out of your memories and onto paper or onto a document, because there is so much wisdom that each person that's listening to this has, that has developed over the course of many, many years, that could help people and can live on well after when you're no longer here anymore. Have you worked with people on building out stories? What do you recommend as to how somebody could, document the stories that they have?
Yeah, what you're talking about, you set out initially to capture all of this in case you died tomorrow and it would be gone. But I suspect in doing this, it has helped you understand yourself so much better, learn about yourself, and probably has been, I would think, extremely empowering when you see what you have overcome. And have you found it to be?
I would say there is a reinforcement of the lessons of the things that I learned along the way. And for me, it really has been, I think maybe this is because those stories, there's been an incredible amount of work that has been done on my own self over the past 15 years, especially, that a lot of these, when I went through and understood about what they were, huge amounts of transformation and understanding and lessons learned and things like that. I think for me during that period, it was and it continues to be a documentation of, the hardships, the challenges. And it's a reinforcement of what had to be gone through in order to come out the other side stronger or more challenged or whatever the thing was in that case. And one of the main reasons was to document it in case something was to happen. And the ultimate reason was to be able to utilize these for purposes from a business standpoint, right? It's the keynotes that I deliver, it's the coaching engagements I have, and these different pieces where I am sharing, and even in the podcast now as well, sharing the insights that can then inspire action in somebody else. And that I guess the other way that I see this is if I'm able to tell the story in a way that everything that you've shared so far of like taking people on a journey, then maybe they wouldn't have to go through the pain that I went through. And so there's a service in there as well, for sure, of how can I alleviate the suffering of somebody else, at least maybe a little bit, compared to what they would have had to go through otherwise of having to figure it out for themselves.
I think the alleviate the suffering happens when people realize they're not alone in a feeling or experience. I think alleviating pain in the sense maybe hearing your story inspires somebody to take in action. But I believe that we learn by doing. And I mean, I also do believe that stories are transformational. So yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. What
and
can people do to actually then document the stories? Because there are, different stories again that are those that are listening to this, there's people that are from all walks of life, but especially within business, for example, there's going to be objections they have to overcome. There's products they're aiming to sell. There's on the relationship side, maybe there's that piece as well. Like, how can people go about actually documenting the stories from their life?
Well, I think, again, what you just said are three different, like selling, marketing, or documenting so that it's not lost or so that others can learn. I mean, those are slightly different use cases. But again, one is to have a daily habit, as you started and seem to be keeping to. I think that's hard for a lot of people. I say to myself, you're going to journal, Cheryl, you're going to journal. And I sit down and I do it for a few days. And then I'm like, this is boring or whatever. I just get really, really busy and don't make time for it. So I think it also starts with, unless somebody has a goal with it, like if there's a concrete goal. But otherwise, I think many people don't realize that they do have amazing stories. You said it, every single person has amazing learnings, amazing stories. Like our actions every single day tell a story. More than anything we say, it is what we do. But most people don't think that they have interesting stories. So I think it starts with somebody saying, like, I am going to anything that I think about, I have a memory of something that happened, or something happens today, here and now. Whatever. I read something and it ignites something. I'm going to write about it. Then I think if somebody did say, I'm going to make a daily habit of writing about it. I mean, I know people who just turn on the voice record on their phones when things hit them. I was one of the producers on David O. Russell's first movie, Spanking the Monkey. I don't know if he still does it, but he used to. That was before we had, phones and voice recordings. He would just have a notepad with him 24/7 and just like constantly be taking notes of what he was observing and thinking, and stories. So I guess part of it is the intention. So setting the intention of, I am going to do this, and then making it a ritual or habit, whether it's journal or voice recording or, however one sets that up. And then also like not being harsh on censoring. What is a story? Like, what I think whenever we have an idea, a memory, could be a story. The stories we tell ourselves. I mean, the stories we tell ourselves, I think, can be so detrimental or so beneficial. That inner critic, the limiting beliefs, are the stories we tell ourselves that hold us back, or the stories of, I can do it. I have a goal and I imagine the life I want or the world I want to build, and that story. Again, back to neuroscience. I read a book recently that I loved, Into the Magic Shop, by Dr. James Doty, a leading neurosurgeon who died over the summer, sadly. But that is not woo-woo. That is the neuroscience behind our ability to change our reality based on imagining the life we want and then believing that it can happen. We have to believe in it, and then setting that intention. And then we put all our focus and energy once we do those first two things. It's also story and storytelling can feel so precious, or feel like, oh, there's a certain way that's the right way. And again, we started our conversation by talking about what makes a good story, but that's when I was talking about when you want to tell a story that is going to engage your audience and move them and shift attitudes and behavior. But I do think that the stories, if we're documenting our own stories, then we have to take all censorship off of what's a good story and just let whatever comes up for us come out. I think that is really important.
I think it's important as well, because you don't know what could be crafted into a great story until afterwards anyway. And you go through it. And I mean, some of the things that I found useful is one, if you laugh at any stage, there's a story there. Right? Whatever happened, like there's a great story there, something that occurred. If you found it funny, there's a good chance that someone else is going to find it funny as well. So there's one of that, like something that was entertaining. Another is like a hardship that you overcame. Like, okay, you were experiencing something, you overcame it. That is guaranteed a story right there and then. Other things like if you
triumph, that is the
struggle and triumph right there, right? And just like the ability, like these moments that you remember as well, these moments that, you know, years on are still impactful moments for you. There's possibly going to be someone that might appreciate that. And so what I found like really useful first and foremost, rather than getting down into the weeds of actually telling the story itself, is just get really high level and just like one line of what's the title of the story, like what, and just very briefly, what happened, like where were you, what happened, and you can come back to it later and go down into further detail. At least that's how I went about it. Was I just brain dumped. Okay, these are all the things that I can possibly remember, and then it was about then having the discipline from there to actually then go and tell the stories. You mentioned about the stories that we tell ourselves. What are some of the stories that you've told yourself in the past that have held you back, and how have you worked to overcome those?
I definitely have a very active, less so now, very active inner critic. And I think the inner critic was helpful in some ways, because the inner critic has pushed me so hard to achieve, to set an exceptionally high standard in anything I do. But that exceptionally high standard holds me back also, because then I get paralyzed of, I'll write a LinkedIn post, but it's like, this isn't good enough, I won't post it. And also, I can be vastly, infinitely open and vulnerable in person, or when I'm filming, or even I'm trying to be more so in my keynotes. But when I do anything that to me feels performative, I recently created finally my speaker website, which was hard for me. It was painful because, putting the photos of myself up there or writing about myself. I love telling other people's stories or sharing my stories if it's driving human connection, intimate connection. But when it's anything that feels performative for me is very hard.
Why is it hard for you?
That's a good question. I must worry about being judged, and it's silly because when I speak or when I make a film, people are deeply moved. So if I could just tell myself, like, just share what you know, share what you do, as the same reason why I make films, the same reason why I do keynotes, should be a joy to create a LinkedIn post to do the same. But it becomes, I get twisted like a pretzel sometimes and very in my head. When COVID hit, I'd worked really hard. I'd been head of production at a big company, left to launch my own company, worked really hard to build that, and decided I wanted to be a solopreneur. I mean, I had left being head of production for a big company because I wasn't feeling alignment with what I was making anymore. I had been making, hundreds of hours of nonfiction television, for Nat Geo and Discovery and all those channels. And when that turned into reality TV, I didn't want to make reality TV. So I finally got up the courage to launch my own production company with the goal of working with people who shared my values and also making things, telling stories that put good juju into the world and also reflected my values. And then did that, had this production company and was doing that, but then felt that I had to say yes or chase projects that also were not in alignment to cover the overhead. And so that's when I became a solopreneur, was coming into 2020 after working very hard to build a lot of directing and keynotes, and then COVID hit, boom, everything stopped. And I had felt prior to that like a rocket ship, like taking off, and then became a truck stuck in the mud. Now, what does this have to do with the stories we tell ourselves? I blame my husband a little bit for this. And I also so appreciate his living in gratitude at every moment. The story I told myself and that he kept telling me was, be thankful, be thankful, be thankful. Like, and I was thankful that I have roof over my head, economic stability, health, a beautiful family and friends. So whenever I would feel mourning or sad about everything I had lost, my husband would say, what are you talking about? You should be like, we have everything to be grateful for. So that's an example of a story I kept telling myself, that normally I think gratitude is the best. It's one of the best things we can feel, and it leads to usually only good things. That was an instance where I wasn't letting myself feel it all, feel everything, and allowing myself to go through a period of mourning, and I really got kind of stuck. But most of the time, and that is a funny kind of inverted story of telling myself something that got me stuck, but most of the time it's the stories of somehow not good enough or like, I mean, I've done so much my whole life of moving outside my comfort zone and doing things that were scary to me. And I know that we only learn and grow and see what we are capable of and develop and hone strengths that we would have never discovered if we don't move outside our comfort zone. So I really do lean into that. But I do sometimes, I'm very hard on myself. My best friend sometimes gets really angry with me, and she says, Cheryl, the way you talk to yourself, like you would never talk to someone else. Like, I'm so compassionate with others. I'm always like so much compassion. She's like, where's the compassion for yourself here? So, yeah.
It's important. I mean, maybe the most important part of this is not so much the stories that we're telling others, but the story that we're telling ourselves, or at the very least, like on par, because it's not only what results in you either taking action or non-action, it's also your experience that you have while you're taking action or non-action. Because it's one thing, like if you're taking the action and loving the ride, or you're taking the action and it's like really, really, really difficult. And just having that experience, I think the stories that we tell ourselves is incredibly important. You said that it's decreased a bit over time. What are some of the things that you've done that has resulted in it decreasing over time that's helped?
Yeah, and what you said before is 100%. I had a Nigerian friend staying with us recently, and I was one day, it's super anxious about prepping for 2 keynotes, writing the new South by. I had just so much to do, and I got very anxious. And Ashoke, I mean, she was such this beautiful mirror reflected back to me, and she looked at me and very honestly, I mean, she wasn't sarcastic. She said, Cheryl, would you rather not be doing these things? Because she saw how anxious I was. And I like, oh my God, that was just a game changer for me. I'm like, no, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful I'm doing these things. No, I love doing these. And from that day on, I really hear she's in my head. And if I get anxious, I'm like, I ask myself that question. It's like, no, I don't have to be doing this. I'm doing this because I want to, So yes, it's like.
Well, there's I had an interview recently with Juan Bendania, and he mentioned about his mum specifically. Great keynote speaker, great human. Anybody listening, go and check him out, follow. He's outstanding. With that, he mentioned towards the end of the episode, his mum, they grew up in Nicaragua and were born in Nicaragua and then moved to Canada. And when they moved to Canada, she had this piece of, I think the wording he used or she used and he shared about was, I'm happy to be here. And so anytime now he's like in a airport and there's a delay or something like that, or there's a less than desirable situation, just that happy to be here. And it's such a good way of thinking about it because, there's plenty of situations that we all go through that in the moment we don't necessarily want to experience it, but the alternative was something else. And like just what your friend shared as well, no, I'm more than happy to experience this and go through the hardship as a result of it because it enables me to do what I love.
Well, I mentioned my husband who was just so full of gratitude during COVID, and I think like got me a little stuck. But he lost 2/3 of his colleagues on 9/11. And
Wow.
I think that, and every day I am so grateful that he's alive. I was at a business breakfast that morning and he had to take our daughter to preschool, and that is why he's alive.
Oh,
But
damn.
yeah. But he cherishes every single moment, just
Yeah.
cherishes so that I am happy to be here. He lives that in every moment. And I wonder, I probably is shaped by the 9/11 experience of losing 2/3 of 2/3 of the firm. But yes, so you asked, what have I done? Because I really, that inner critic is quite quieted now. One of the things I did, and again, it was definitely when the inner critic didn't have me working around the clock to push me, and I had no work to do when COVID hit. I couldn't public speak or filmmake. It turned on me and really went wild. And I was coming out of it by 20, I think, when was it? I was coming out of it over the years and beginning to, do things again. I wasn't depressed. It was not depression. It was just like truck stuck in the mud. I went on a psychedelic trip and that was extraordinary. And that trip, I worked with a guide who's also a therapist. And she's extraordinary, just beyond extraordinary. And we had many sessions where I was setting intention. I wrote up 17 pages looking at kind of what had gotten me there and my relationship to that inner critic and all of that, which sounds very self-indulgent actually. But that journey, it was so gorgeous. It was beautiful, but it was all about letting go. And it was many hours, those mushroom trips are long. It was many hours of me. I had my hands up in the sky, up. I thought that I had lightning bolts coming out of my hands, so power. And then I would go into a gratitude pose, and then I would open my heart. And it was just in tempo with rhythm with the music. And I just kept chanting, Cheryl, let go. Let go, let go. And I said, Cheryl, you've got this. You've got this. You can let go. At one point, my father showed up, who's not alive. And I said, Dad, you can let go. I got this. So, I grew up with a mother who was dropped out of college because her father was a gambler and they couldn't afford to keep her in school, and she couldn't afford to get financial aid because he earned too much, but they had no money. And she became a presidential appointee. She was completely mission driven my whole life, and Ford Foundation program officer, and she's a badass, and I've learned all my values from her and my dad, and grew up with a father who raised me more than my mother, because my mother was very absentee. My father telling me every single day, you can do anything you put your mind to. You can be anything you put your mind to. So, I must have this alchemy that was not so good, so healthy, of this mother who was this super achiever, presidential appointee, literally changed the world. and this father who told me I could do or be anything, which probably was, a lot of pressure. That combination. And maybe that's like, I have 2 siblings. My brother's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. My sister is also like super accomplished. And all 3 of us have this sense of like never enough or never good
Right.
enough. Even though my parents, my whole life, like I was the youngest by a lot. They're a bit older. But like they would call me, like when we would speak and I was in college, they'd say, get out of the library and go have some fun. You're working too hard. When I came out of school and had a job I was miserable at a time when jobs weren't, like it was a recession, they're like, you're miserable, quit, find something else. Like I don't think of them as hard driving, but I do think that children pick up on what we do, not what we say.
Yeah. And we process it. We process it all in different ways as well, right? And that's fascinating stuff. That we all process things in different ways. And even if you have those listening, like the most amazing upbringing, there can easily be, well, you did everything for me then. It's like, you're going to have all those kinds of issues. So
oh my God.
I love that you had that experience, and it sounds like it was very transformational for you. I know for me, there's been multitude of different experiences like that, both on the plant medicine side and on the breathwork side as well. I had this experience. It's wild because one of those lessons for me was letting go, and a bunch of years ago now, and I was doing this breathwork session at home, and there was this crazy visual, as I was going through this. It was a holotropic breathwork session.
Yep.
And towards the end, it was like cruising out, and it was like I was out in the planets. I think it was like Saturn I was going past. And then there was like these beings that then said, this is no psychedelic things whatsoever, purely in the form of breath, the power of breath. And then there was a let go, was exactly the same words. It was a let go. And then there was a part of me that's going, oh yeah, like kind of playing around with it. And then it was almost a forceful let go. Like it was a forceful piece. And there was this orgasmic experience that I had afterwards that lasted for about 30, 60 seconds. It was like an orgasm, but like it went much, much longer than that during a sexual experience. And it was like I was mind blown, for one, because I'd had some really cool breathwork experiences, but that was out of this world. It was, and I don't know what that is. I'm not
no,
I just go through the experience of that, but beautiful.
One of the things my guide made me do before my journey was to do a breathwork session.
Yeah, nice.
And I was put into a psychedelic state as well. And my father was there with me. So the person I did the breath work with explained, I'm not going to explain it because I don't want to botch science and get it wrong, but she explained why the holotropic breathing brings on, for some people, there are neurochemical reasons why. And then there was, right after I did that session with her, there was an article in the New York Times about how holotropic breath work is being used for the same kind of therapies for PTSD and OCD and a lot of the same therapies that the psychedelics are being used for. So it absolutely, the holotropic breath work does it. It'll
be fascinating to see what happens in the coming years and the research that comes out. It's great that the research is being done, because I'm a big believer that there's some incredible results that it is already generating, and it will generate for many people going through challenge, but also just be creative as well. I know some of my best ideas have come through psychedelic experiences and over the last number of years, which has been fascinating and beautiful and amazing at the same time. One thing we touched on it earlier, the narrative, was it narrative transportation? Well, share what that is exactly, because I've got something that I want to share. It was a big insight that I had around story, but share with the listeners first up, like specifically what is narrative transportation and how do we get someone to actually go on that journey?
Yeah. So again, neuroscientists in the lab have studied what happens to our brain on a story when we're engaged. And if somebody feels that there's someone in the story that they are attaching to, they're relating to, then they become literally a participant in the story.
Do they
They're
become
no-
the character in their minds?
I mean, there's a professor at Princeton who studies how brain waves sync, and I know that his studies definitely are when two people. I suspect our brain waves are syncing when two people are in a conversation and they're very engaged with each other, and there's a real like chemistry or we say chemistry, right? A give and take, active engaged listening, where then the people's brain waves actually sync. I think that his studies also speak to brain waves syncing with someone in a story, but the neuroscience of narrative transportation is when, yes, we are literally transported into a story through someone who we are feeling what they're feeling, that oxytocin is flowing and we are feeling bonded, we are feeling care and connection. And then we become a participant, not just a passive viewer, which is why when you said watching a movie and getting lost in a movie is doing something, yes, storytelling, even as the observer, the viewer, the audience member, in our keynotes, I know that people are losing themselves and going on a journey. So yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the most powerful stories, because then again, if you end on a feeling of empowerment, people feel empowered to go do something
for themselves as well. And this is really important because this is, and I had these different experiences at different times, but there's one in particular that I remember. I had guitar and vocal lesson with a coach that I had when I was living in Nashville in Tennessee. And one of the songs, I shared the story as to why I wrote it, and it was about something to do with family and specifically my nieces and nephews. And there's a song that I wrote that's, you know, has them, and who are they going to become, and these different pieces. And there was some other pieces as well to it. But sharing the story specifically, I told the story based on our experience, my experience that I have. And I then played the song, and then afterwards, like, he shared how much it resonated with him, for one, and then he shared about his nephew, and, you know, talking about that experience, and I had this realization. I never shared it with him because it wasn't the moment to share anything like that, because he was having his moment. That the way I think about it in that regard is that my stories might be about me, but they're not for me. In that moment, they're for the person that I'm telling the story to. And in that moment, we're co-creating together. And that's what I think is so incredibly beautiful about storytelling, is that as you tell a story, it will never, ever be created in that way, because you're co-creating with each and every audience member. If you're in a talk, for example, or you're creating a film, whatever it is, that it will never be created in that way ever again. And it was a beautiful example that I had with him of my family. In this case, the story was about, I didn't get a mention. My family didn't get a mention. It was all him. He put himself into the story. He inserted his nephew into the story, and it was the action that was going to be taken. I won't share the exact specifics because it's personal. The exact specifics, though, is there was an action going to be taken out the back end by him.
Yes.
That resulted from, like, is that classed as narrative transportation?
Yeah,
in that way?
Sure.
It is.
Well,
yeah.
Of course. I mean, he was in the story with you. And then
what I would say is that I don't think I was even in the story.
well,
I think he was he was inserting himself as me as an example. And then, as far as those characters, it was, he created his own characters in this case. And I've seen this happen on a number of occasions, where it seems, at least, and maybe we're walking along side by side in that scenario, and maybe he just didn't share it. But largely, again, there was nothing shared whatsoever about me and the situation that occurred. It was all about him, and I just found that remarkably beautiful. That a story that could be about something completely different could enter into his life and lead to some kind of change.
Well, that is the beauty of storytelling, right? It ignites something, it unlocks, it unleashes it. The French writer Jean-Paul Sartre said that he writes a book, but that book is rewritten by every reader.
So good.
It gets rewritten. And it's why when I traveled the world in the country with Generation Startup, the startup founders didn't get up and talk at length about Dextina or Labib. They got up and talked at length about themselves and their personal experiences, but as a jumping off point of what they had felt. And the journey they had taken that was so relatable. Yes, they were watching that movie and seeing themselves at every moment. Or, Truth to Transformation about foster care. When that film is screened with community groups, people who have been touched by or part of the foster care system, they are so keen to get up and share their stories, because it unlocks and unleashes something. So that is the beauty of storytelling. And that is also why it's so important to tell stories that are universally relatable. They can be specific. I mean, the devil's in the details for sure in any story, but make it deeply specific, but about universally relatable emotions and experiences.
I love that. Very, very good. Very, very powerful. Hey, we have a rapid fire segment on the show here called Your Edge. We go through your values, beliefs, and habits. What's your number one value and why?
I have so many values, and and they're just like, the organ. If you told me what's the most important organ in my body, it's a system, and my values are a system. So, but if I had to pick one, and this is maybe two, but
you go pick one and then have some backups. Let's go that.
Okay, so navigate life with an open heart and open mind. And then the bedfellows, the greater system is, compassion, lead with love, curiosity, deep and genuine interest in others. I try not to be judgmental, but, most of all, compassionate and loving and open-minded.
Beautiful. What's a belief that shaped who you've become, whether it be a belief about yourself, about others, or the world?
Again, I have so many. I would say my belief these days that just keeps showing up a lot is alignment. It's why I left a very secure job as head of production for a company where I did not feel alignment with what I was making and how I was leading and managing people. And it's what gave me the courage. Things got so unpleasant, or I was so unhappy that I finally took the step to do something really scary, which was going out on my own and launching my own company. And now, if you work with people who are in alignment with your values and beliefs, then it's so joyful and it works out so beautifully. And if you don't, then everything is so much harder. And then also alignment of, it's why I am still married to the man I've been married to for decades. We're very different people, as we married very young, and we've grown into very different people as in terms of our interests and all of that. We're so aligned in our values, so deeply aligned, and that is the glue
So is the
So
belief
alignment.
then the belief in living an aligned life? So I believe in living an aligned life when it comes to the people that I'm working with, the life that I'm living, the business that I'm building. That's the
Absolutely.
belief
Yes,
surrounding
yes,
it. Yeah.
yes. Yes, or making
Yeah.
decisions based on, I mean, I say no to work if I feel
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
there is not alignment with the people or the values of, I don't pursue friendships if I feel that there is not alignment, and not in a mean or judgmental way, and it's also not, because I believe so strongly that we have to be in community with people who don't share our beliefs, or be open-minded to find commonality, because we're so fractured in our nation. And so I believe strongly in the importance of keeping an open mind and trying to find common ground with other people, even if they're not aligned with our beliefs, because I do believe that you can always find, again, those universal human needs, desires, and that is the way into finding alignment with others. But in terms of life choices, yes, and being in alignment with, listen, I love a great glass of wine with dinner. My body is not in alignment with me drinking wine now.
That's a
I
good
mean, I
point.
just I don't always love going to the gym, but I don't feel good if I don't. It's like a lot. I mean, those are specific examples of health,
Yeah.
but just listening to our gut about what is right for us, and living with that conviction. And this gets back to being super clear about what are my values, what are my beliefs, and then being guided by my values and my beliefs, which is why it's so hard to answer what is my one overriding value. Not like I'm not walking around consciously saying, am I living my values? They are just so part and parcel of who I am. They're my traits. They're my how I show up in the world. I live by my values and my beliefs, which is I live a life of conviction. It's just, but if something doesn't, if it's not aligned with my values or beliefs in my behavior, then I feel I'm not judgmental of others. The only thing I care about is, am I living up to the standards I set for myself in terms of my values and my beliefs?
Yeah.
So, and again, that comes back to showing up for others with care and compassion and love. And that is
It's
the most
important.
important.
It is. It's really important. What's a habit, routine, or ritual that you can't live without? That could be a daily habit right out to an annual tradition, or both.
Well, you asked earlier, what do I beat myself up about, or the stories I tell myself, and I am not a habitual ritualized person. I envy those who are. I so wish I could get up at 6 a.m. and do the journaling and work out, and I just I recoil at rituals and habits. And I think that my 3 kids have articulated they wished that we had more. And I actually I don't believe in regret, but it is something I regret about how we parented. There is a ritual that my husband and I have that, again, is another thing that I think has kept us together all these decades with love, is whenever we go anywhere, whenever I leave the apartment or he leaves the apartment or come back to the apartment, and it's now whenever I leave a room or come back into a room, we give each other a kiss. It is such a ritual. If I were to leave without kissing him goodbye, I would feel incomplete. And we live very independent lives. We're very independent of each other, but there are certain things that are rituals that bond us, and that is one of them. It's a really beautiful ritual.
Really beautiful. Really beautiful. I love it. Hey, it's been a great conversation. How can people go to find out more about you, connect with you?
I have my production company website is creativebreed.com. My speaker website is CherylMillerHouser.com. When I am not overwhelmed with filmmaking and keynotes, I am on LinkedIn and want to be on LinkedIn more often. But yes, LinkedIn is also a good place. And then my email, which is CherylHouser@creativebreed.com.
Great. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Cameron, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored. It has been such a pleasure. And I've listened to some of your other episodes. I love them. Love them, love them. Congratulations. Thank you for telling the stories that you are putting out into the world.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that. And yeah, it has been a real pleasure. So thank you again. And for those listening, we'll have everything that was mentioned linked in the show notes at CameronAtlas.com/podcast. We've got some great new guests coming up. So make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss an episode. And until next time, go and write the next line in your story. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time here on The Edge of Possible.